Okay, hello everybody. I am now live. Welcome to the Sunday evening. We're going on to Monday Moon Day. This is technically the Sunday night astro show, the late night show. I'm going to be doing a very special reading tonight. We're going to be doing a birth and death chart reading for Brandon Lee. And Brandon Lee is the star, the late great star of The Crow from 1994. Not to be confused with the recent remake that's being done right now. I'm talking about the original cult classic that was a part of my childhood growing up. And so this is going to be an ode to Brandon Lee, a look at his life. We're going to look at his birth chart, and then we're going to take a look at his time of death chart, and then I'm going to take a look at I will probably do a follow-up to this conversation, this astro conversation. Actually, let me first introduce myself and give you some context to this show. All right, so I am Rachel Z. I am an astrologer, personal trainer, and wifey to my shaman husband, Kevin. So we also have a production company called Golden Sugar Productions, and we are focused on storytelling using light and sound and magic in order to do so in this new world that we find ourselves in, where storytelling is so very important. And the most important story of all is the one of yours, your personal story, and how that story impacts others that you love, as well as the grand cosmos as large, because you figuring out yourself is the universe also figuring itself out. So that's a little bit of my lens. If you are interested in booking a reading with me, I've cleaned up my offerings page. I'll have that live up by tonight. And so I do readings on Thursdays and Fridays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very confusing with the fake daylight savings thing going on. Time is but a construct. That is a quote from my Dragon Warriors Saga novel. But without further ado, I'm going to go into neurolinguistic astrology reading of Brandon Lee's chart, just so you can also get some understanding as to my approach as it comes to astrology. I read this recent article on Substack, actually, that was like, we need to talk about astrology, and all these women who are always like asking about like what your birth time is and all that kind of stuff. And granted, I do have girlfriends who do contact me and text me being like, can you look up this guy's chart and you tell me if he's like okay. But like that's a very it's a loaded thing to say, and I recommend that you look at some of my synastry readings to take a look at how those charts playing with each other, where like it's not as simple to say like, I'm a Scorpio, will I work well with a Libra? That's maybe and maybe not, and maybe you're better as friends, but that also depends on other things going on in the chart. And we can use case studies with people who have lived in the public eye, where their stories are a lot more readily available to us to gravitate towards, to find empathy with. That's where we can find a lot of truth behind these, the fictions that they were in, and where that fiction intertwines with what reality is. And so without further ado, let's go into the presentation. So Brandon Lee, oh, my dear Brandon Lee. I'm not going to spoil anything in my book about Brandon specifically, but in terms of his birth, so I have an image there of him from the original Crow movie. I just watched it with Kevin and my father-in-law just recently, just to like refresh my memory of this movie, because this movie has a lot of memories with me from my bestie Laura, who I've recently reconnected with. And hey, if you're watching this, Laura. And like we lost contact, and like is like, because time is not linear, right? Like my best friend. And we had a lot of imaginative and dream adventures together, and I do remember Laura loving The Crow a lot, and this actor a lot, and his he's just a beautiful man too. I was like watching the movie, I'm like, what a beautiful, beautiful boy. So he was born in Oakland, California on February 1st, 1965. He was actually born with the sun in Aquarius and the moon in Aquarius, with his rising sign in Capricorn. He also has something in common with me, which is Black Moon Lilith is also sitting really close on his ascendant, and I will show you what that looks like here in his AstroSeek. So I'm actually pretty pleased that AstroSeek actually has him already, his chart already created. You don't always get it, but I like this chart because it shows you a little bit more. I guess I'm like graduating from my my astrology calculators, so I prefer to use this chart just because there are a bit more luminaries to take a look at and to derive more stories and angles from that. So as you can see here, his sun and moon are in Aquarius, and they're right there on top of each other. And this is very we are no longer in Aquarius season right now. That was February, like he was born February 1st, so that's in Aquarius season. But we are coming up to an eclipse, and that is April 8th. And an eclipse happens when the sun and moon are in a similar position as this, right? Where the moon is essentially blocking the sun in a solar eclipse during a new moon. I hope I'm getting that right. I believe so. Yeah, otherwise, if it's apart, during a full moon, the moon is across from the sun, and then that's why the moon gets all of that luminous energy from the sun. And when there's a lunar eclipse, the earth is between that, and so the energies of those eclipses are different. This isn't to say I have to double check if Brandon Lee was born on eclipse. I saw how one of the astrologers I watch, Robert Phoenix, if you're watching this, I was watching how you were saying that more people are born on eclipses than are not. That's an interesting, I guess, statistic, right? And so, like, what does that mean? And from a perspective of our bodies syncing up with the moon, I mean, women and our menstrual cycles every 28 days, to some, variation, there's a cycle like that. And also like the tides and how the fact that we are mostly made up of water, it kind of makes sense that the moon would have that level of influence on us on some degree. So you can see here too that the sun and moon sit in the first house for Brandon Lee, and so that's a lot of energy in the self, in the persona that you stand out in this life. He was like destined to take the stage. And here you can see what I was talking about, which is similar to me, where Black Moon Lilith sits on the ascendant, and the crow, that role is very, very much this. Because it's the dark side of the moon. I did a whole presentation on Black Moon Lilith. I will drop a link to that if you're interested in that, about it's not a real point, it's like a mathematical point based on other points of the other moon. And so this is Capricorn, and this being in an air sign and then having the rising sign being in Capricorn means that he's a hard worker, even though I was reading up on him before doing this talk, and he was very rebellious growing up. He lost his father, it was Bruce Lee, right? The extremely famous and prolific and legendary martial artist. And it's just eerie how their deaths echoed each other. I'm not going to get into that right now because this is about Brandon's birth and his life, and he lost his father when he was 8. And I don't know if there's any way of, let's see, if there's a way of like indicating that here, because you look at Pluto is very close to Neptune here. That's a nice big juicy Titanic conjunction. I guess, like a lot of kids born in the 60s would have this similar kind of layout. I will have to double check some of my other, I have a dragon warrior who's born in the 60s, and I'll double check if this aspect here of this is Pluto and Neptune, so Poseidon and Hades being in the same sign of Virgo. Virgo is of being of service. It's also ruled by Mercury on another level, maybe Chiron too, but there is a level of service, but then also magic as part of that service. And I think a little bit level of like, we have to remember that there is mercurial nature to it, and that Virgo is also a mutable sign. So there is levels of dispersion here. And I think maybe Brandon could feel like he was under his father's shadow in a lot of ways. I could see that that could be the case. Also, as someone who is multiracial, growing up in a time when there weren't a lot of other multiracial kids, even if your dad was famous, I could see that being as something you have to grapple with. And Aquarius being ruled by two planets rather. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn and Uranus, and this is also because like Uranus wasn't discovered till like in the 1900s, and Saturn is its I believe. I wonder if Aquarius's ancient ruler is still Saturn. I have to look into that, but for now, for today's purposes, today's talk, Aquarius is ruled by both Saturn and Uranus, and that's the rebel and the teacher. And having both sun and moon there is that your main power, your main soul force, and your emotions are very intertwined. In a perspective of Aquarius, almost lives very in these upper chakras. I like to say very mental. I have friends who are air signs, and I get it, but and I don't want to say it's lack of grounding, because there's an understanding of grounding, but there's one thing to mentally conceive of something, and there's another to practically do a thing. And there can be, that's all I want to say about that. It's like, it's a shame that Brandon Lee never got to fully express his potential in being an action star because of the tragic way that his life ended. I don't know. Let's see here. His North Node is in Libra, his South Node being in Sagittarius. We'll see. Actually, you know what? When we go into Brandon's death chart, I will probably book a follow-up talk on the anniversary. Oh my gosh. Right. That's crazy. So, on the 31st is the anniversary of Brandon Lee's death. So I'm going to book a little talk for that evening to do a talk about it. And then maybe we'll take a look at the Crow comic book for the spooky Sunday evening read, which I will be doing on TikTok afterwards. Okay, so just to clarify, in terms of Brandon Lee's chart, he was born in Oakland in the US. He, I think I already said this, February 1st, 1965, so a baby born in the 60s, a mixed race baby at a time when perhaps there weren't very many mixed race kids. And we have also another thing I wanted to point out before we move on into his death chart, that he has Mercury and Venus very close to his rising sign here. So I was saying he's like a beautiful man. Because of Venus here too, going to be very attractive. And in Capricorn, you have this hardworking, resilient, I think it's one of those things where I think Capricorn, when ruled by Saturn, it's like you look older than your years when you're young, but then as you get older, you end up looking just like the same age or younger, right? It's like, it's that kind of situation. I got like that because I looked so young for so long, and whenever I was like a manager or something, or I was like working at the hospital, people thought I was like an intern or a student. I'm like, I am not a student, I am a manager. It's funny. But yeah, it's just about I'm saying Capricorn, people with Capricorn placements, that can be a thing where like you can look older than your years, but then it like hits midpoint where like you're like 30, and then like it's like, oh, now age wise you tend to look just younger, or like you just stay looking 30, like you're like born looking 30, and then when you're 70 you still look 30, like that. And then let's see here, Jupiter is in Taurus, which is the position that we have right now in the sky, where Jupiter's in Taurus, and you know, the shakeup of the financial industries, that's a big theme. I am not big on financial stuff. I like to look at Taurus more from a perspective of body, and the relationship of the body to the earth and resources to the earth and the kinship of that between each other. And Jupiter in Taurus can mean a lot of a expansive understanding of how our bodies really function for us at a personal level. There was we also have Uranus right now, which is why I say shake it up, but here not so much, more of just like expansion and growth in this area, and that's what he's going to be imprinted with as well. In terms of the moon, let's see here, I like how this is already, he's born technically on a balsamic dark moon, and so this can, and on this like late degree, so both this, oh yeah, okay. The moon is in a juicy spot. That's an interesting thing. And also the fact that he was a wood dragon, which is what we're in right now, wood dragon. And so dragon bursts with strength, energy, and health. People born in the year of the dragon are very open and never petty. They hate hypocrisy and gossip, and generally do not have the best diplomatic dexterity. However, they are trusting and allow themselves to be manipulated. I mean, I got into a rabbit hole looking at Bruce Lee's death, so actually that's like, I'm going to segue into the death charts very soon, and actually that'll be a better way to talk about the suspicious way both of Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee passed. His life path is 6, and so you get your life path number by taking your birth date, so like the day of your birth, your month, and then the year, and then you like add that all together until you get a single number at the end of it. I may do a little sample how you do that at some point, but regardless, that's how you figure out your life path number. And from this perspective, it says that these people have to make choices very often, and it is necessary to make the right decisions in the face of emerging opportunities. Romantic relationship, family, and home are the foundations for success, and they like helping others. So having a good home life, I mean, this would just mean that the passing of his father would have been very traumatic for him and imprinted him later, especially if family means a lot to him. He was supposed to be married as well after The Crow wrapped filming. Let me see here if there's something else I want to look at here. There's also, this is all taking care, like this is like 12th house stuff. Oh, sorry, not 12th house stuff. The Black Moon lives in the 12th house stuff. This is all here, and Port of Fortune is right on the ascendant. So there's a level of destiny in his life that is right there, like X marks the spot in terms of that. So Brandon Lee, my beautiful boy, that was a little bit about his birth. And so born February 1st, 1965, Oakland. And we went through his chart. He's an Aquarius with a moon in Aquarius. That's a lot of intelligent energy as well, and dual nature, and also the fact that it's in his first house. You have the sun and moon there, emotions and your heart's purpose, learning how to have those work together, those energies work together, is a learning in this life. All right, and now Brandon's death chart reading. Oh my gosh. It's going to be 30 years since he passes on the 31st. So Just going to read a little bit here. When The Crow came out, it was an instant cult classic. But 2 weeks before camera crews wrapped production, the star of the film, 28-year-old Brandon Lee, was shot and killed on set. His mysterious 1993 death echoed the strange passing of his legendary father, Bruce Lee, decades earlier. No criminal charges were ever filed in connection with Brandon Lee's death, and the movie was released the following year. So I'm sorry, it would be 29 years since his death on the 31st, and it's actually, because the year later, it'd be 30, and then 31 years for, oh my gosh, I'm just getting my numbers mixed up right now. Don't quote me on any of that. Let's stick to the death chart reading. Okay, The Crow was released on May 13th, 1994, and we're in 2024. Yeah, so that'll be 30 years. It would have already been 30 years since Brandon's death then, as of last year. I know it'd be 31 years now. So that's insane to think about in some degree. And when you think of time passing, he died on set due to a prop gun that was, there was a dummy bullet and it pierced his stomach, and he died in the hospital after surgery, after trying to stop the internal bleeding. But I took a look at the time that Brandon left the realm. You can see here. So Brandon Lee did die during filming The Crow. It's kind of crazy too, because when you watch the movie, you really can't tell. This is 1993, right? They filmed this for release in 94, and you can't tell. It's like the very earliest deep fake technology, and the stunt man who did a lot of the scenes was Brandon Lee's friend, and I forgot his name right now. He's in one of the articles I'll have in like the show notes in the blog article. I'll put it for this afterwards. But his friend was the stunt person who filled in for him, who had like a similar build to Brandon, ended up being the co-creator to John Wick. So it's just really interesting how, these things all tie together. Oops. Oh my gosh. Let me go back. Okay. So a prop gun, and March 31st, 1993 was when this happened. And it was about oh my gosh, it was in the afternoon. I have the exact time that I put into the calculator. And in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where all of the interior sets were filmed for The Crow. Important things, or things that I find interesting to note, I always like to look at the north and south nodes. It's just interesting that the south node is where, like in Libra, and that's like past life stuff. So it's interesting how that's in Libra. When Brandon was born, the north node was in Libra. So it's like reversed. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but this means karma in some sort of regard. And Libra also splits the chart and deals with like the splitting of darkness and light, and that's perhaps what happened here. This I also was pointing out as being especially significant. So the fact that the moon and Mars is a very unique situation in the 12th house in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is very much like the chest, and the moon is ruled by Cancer. So you have this here, and you have fiery Mars energy just enveloped by this watery lunar force. So this together in the 12th house, which is like the subconscious, the liminal space, at this point in time when that gun goes off, it is like encapsulated in this like haze of mystery, because no one knows how that even happened. I mean, could have been a mistake. There's tons of conspiracy theories about it being a murder. Bruce Lee's death, his father's death, happened when he was 8 and was likewise kind of sketchy. Like, he was in Hong Kong, he was given this like painkiller that was prescription, and then he died later, but he had an edema, so that's his official cause of death. But like, yeah, it's just weird stuff, weird. And then I will take a look at Bruce Lee's chart and do some synastry connection readings on the 31st, so stay tuned for that. But other things here, Pisces has in it, the dreamland area has Mercury, which is Mercury's about the connection between the divine and the material, like, messenger of the gods, and so carrying messages through. And so the crow is even that, right? Coming back from the dead to avenge his lady love. And here, the dark side of human nature and the imagination and communicating. That is really what his death ends up being. He is filming his death scene in the movie before he becomes the crow when that accident occurs. And it's just interesting because a year later, Eric Draven becomes the crow, rises from the dead to make things right on Devil's Night, which is the night before Halloween. And so it's like he has this 24-hour period to make things right. Actually, you know what? I wanted to look this up. Crow symbol. Well, yeah, Odin's crows. Let's do spiritual meaning of crows. And then we'll go back to some of the special effects stuff, and then we will wrap this conversation up until part 2, when we do a synastry between Brandon's birth and death. And then I'm also going to do between Brandon's death and Bruce Lee's death, just to see if there's anything there that we can derive clue-wise. I'm going to also take back some of the things that, because I'm doing this live, right? And so some of those things come to me later, and then I re-look at the chart. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so have you been noticing crows? This bird may be sending you messages about spiritual law, upcoming changes, or even death. Here's what to know about the crow's spiritual meaning. So ravens and crows, but often, but not always, represent death. And 12th house stuff. So if we go back to, let's see here, he has Black Moon Lilith here in the 12th house, but 12th house here, you've got Mars, the planet of action, and the moon together in the 12th house. And if this is natal, this position comes with it really unusual happenings occurring. So that's like the way that the whole thing went down on the crow is very unusual happening. And so events at that time are also imprinted with what those energies are saying. So let's see here. Crows are messengers that are capable of existing between both worlds. This is key because that's the idea of being a shaman as well, or a guide between worlds. Dreamwalker, Skywalker, and the crow in the movie The Crow acts as the eyes for him, for Eric Draven, and so he's able to see through the crow's eyes, and also tied spiritually. So that's why, pets and our dogs and cats are more than just companions. They're more than just pets, they're companions. They are tied to us on a higher plane as well. So they represent spiritual law, the universal wisdom that the physical world must integrate. That I like that explanation. Cat Rambo. I'm gonna see if I can find you for maybe an interview to talk about that. Crows can be considered a good or a bad omen. So this is key, because dragons get this rap too, right? In terms of symbolism, or like, oh, is it evil or is it good? But if we go back to even the petroforms talk I did, nature doesn't work like that. Nature doesn't work in absolutes of like good and bad. It's timing, right? Like rain all the time isn't good. Sunshine all the time isn't good. So it's just about having a balance. So that's more about the perspective of things being in cycles and being in their place in that kind of way, the universal order of things. And so the number of crows matter and the context. So seeing one crow is thought to be a bad omen. And in this case, the single crow is like a bad omen to the bad guys, because the crow is going to come and like hurt you for hurting his lady. So vengeance, right? But two crows could indicate good luck is coming, and 3 suggests impending change. Okay. These interpretations are not universal. So as I mean, this is why stories are very important, because the stories help to couch the specifics of what the symbols are meaning at that time, right? So that's how you determine if something is good or bad for you from your perspective at what's going on. In Native American culture, crows are viewed as messengers between the living and the dead, and sometimes they're depicted as tricksters. Let's see here. So in Alaska, the Athapascan people believe that the raven, similar to the crow but slightly larger, is the creator of the world. Now, crows and ravens are not the same, but it's interesting that Eric's last name was Eric Draven. He has Draven in that name, and so another blackbird, that I think there's equivalencies there, right? And so interesting here, creator of the world there, Raven, very powerful name. There's also a superhero named Raven. In mythology, the crow appears as an important symbol in Norse and Roman mythology. In Norse mythology, the god Odin has 2 crows that he sets free daily, and they serve as Odin's messengers. And in Sailor Moon, Sailor Mars has 2 ravens, I believe, that they're named after the moons of Mars. And in Roman mythology, Apollo was noted to have a white crow who watched over his pregnant lover, Delphos. Oh my gosh, okay. Who's Delphos? Who are you, Delphos? It's a city in Ohio. Okay. I feel like, is that a clue or something? No, I don't want this. Okay, Delphos. A goddess? Delphic oracle? Because remember, the oracle is a Delphi. Okay, that's for another time. I will look this up. I will do a little talk about oracles on Wednesday for Warrior Goddess Wednesday, because this idea of being an oracle and divination, and when you like read cards, you don't need to actually specifically have tarot cards to. You could read playing cards, right? You can use comic books you have lying around and open up to a random page and like do this and be like, okay, that's the message I need to hear today. That's all divination. There's just like ovomancy. You can take like an egg and like crack it in the water and see the shape. Reading tea leaves. They're all different forms of divination, and it's all a matter of like what calls to you and what you feel gravitates to how you want to communicate with ineffable things, ineffable magic. So in Roman mythology, Apollo, which is the god of the sun, was known to have a white crow who watched over his pregnant lover, Delphos. And when the crow brought bad news to Apollo, he turned black. And this can be where the crow started to get a bad reputation. So the crow means spiritual law. It's like a matter of like, I look at this as like a way of like looking at our life before stepping into the new astrological year, because before you can even begin anything new, you need to close out the old. And in doing so, there's this like pause of reflection into what was done, what lessons were learned, what we can take with us in the future, and what needs to be burned away. And so you can see here communication from the spiritual realm, and associated with messengers from the other side, and an intermediary. And there's also this idea, I think in Freddie Mercury's chart, a psychopomp, like this connection between like death. Death is an uncomfortable topic, but we all are going to go through it, and we've all had loved ones pass over, and communication into that world. I've been reading a book called The Awake Dreamer by Samantha Fay. I love her name too, actually. And just about how perhaps the dead dream of us too, and we keep them alive by dreaming of them. And Brandon Lee is a character in my book, as like my spiritual big brother. So it's just been a treat to kind of learn about him a bit more. He was like a rebellious teenager. That's very much in line with being an Aquarius, and going back and forth emotionally in terms of what you really want. And it's why perhaps he wasn't as big of a star by the time he was at his age of 28, like what his father was managed to do. They both died terribly young. Let's see here. A Clean Home. Oh my gosh, okay. So like I'm gonna take a look at this, behind the special effects, because after Brandon passed, he was actually supposed to get married the following month in April 17th, I believe, but instead he was buried next to his father in April. I can't remember the date right now, but this was just this is Brandon and this is Bruce. So I just wanted to share this photo just because it's cute, and it was a time when they were together. And you know what, maybe I'll do a synastry between the two of them. I mean, like, they wouldn't have been together very long, but perhaps there's similarities there where they connect, or you know, like Enter the Dragon, and Brandon Lee was born in the year of the dragon. There's that symbology there as well. And Bruce died in Hong Kong. His mistress was the last person to see him. I don't know too much about Brandon Lee's love life. You know, he was supposed to get married, right? So he was much more stable and like a good guy. I feel like less of this showman that his father was, but at the same time, like, this beautiful boy, and just a terrible tragedy. And The Crow, to this day, I mean, it's a classic. I just watched it. I recommend you all watch it again too. It holds up. Sure does. 94, 93, like it still holds up. The special effects here I wanted to share with you guys.
After star Brandon Lee was killed in a handgun accident, it was days before completion, and Lee's work was not finished. So how did they put Brandon into scenes he was not originally in? Entertainment Tonight reveals the magic as the crow flies. This
was back when Entertainment Tonight actually, like, maybe was worth their salt. And okay, anyways.
This may look like Brandon Lee, but it is not. You are watching a body double. A computer electronically replaced his face with this close-up of the real Brandon Lee. Such cutting-edge technology helped save The Crow from being shelved following Lee's accidental death. The special effects team of DreamQuest Images created a total of 52 shots for the film. 7 involved the late actor.
So we've composited the shot. The only true element that we're missing is the live-action actor blue screen.
Exactly.
Some shots, such as this computer-generated reflection, last about 2 seconds. The most difficult scene is this 5-second shot of Lee returning to his apartment. It is crucial to the plot, but it was never filmed. Fortunately, this footage of Lee in a rainy alley was.
Of course, there was very limited footage of him without makeup.
Step 1, creating a digital moving outline.
We use this, if you will, as a cookie cutter.
So that part was not real. If you watch the movie, you can't tell at all.
From the alleyway scene and place him into the actual scene that we want him.
A shot of the empty apartment becomes the background.
Then it was also necessary for us to add some drips of rain in his apartment to make it look as if it was
leaking through
the roof.
Right.
Then, with the aid of computers, Brandon Lee walks into a scene he never really shot.
And I think translated into hours, that's probably between 5 and 650 hours, 500 to 650 hours of direct labor on this shot.
DreamQuest Images also added elements, including this foreboding landscape, this helicopter, and its searchlight. There are 7 shots of Brandon Lee, total about 30 seconds in an almost 2-hour movie.
This is not a movie where you want to look at it and say, wow, here's an effect, a great effect. If we've done our job well, people won't know that we worked on the film necessarily, and I think that's what we're proudest of.
With its success at the box office over the weekend, there will almost certainly be a sequel to The Crow. Producers say the bird itself and the concept are the keys to continuing the saga.
In the words of David Cassidy, in fact.
Sales would not kick in until this coming Friday. Part of the large turnout may be credited to moviegoers' desire to see the film star, Brandon Lee, who was killed accidentally while making the picture. Another factor behind the success, audiences tend to crave a dark thriller on Friday the 13th. However, the creepy date of release may not have been entirely to Miramax's advantage. Insiders suggest that had the film opened a few weeks earlier, it would not have faced any significant box office competition and therefore could have had a longer flight at the top before the arrival of Maverick.
Maverick? Okay. Regardless, they released the movie on Friday the 13th, so May 13th. Yeah, and that is the original comic book. And so I think next time I will do, my hubby Kevin actually sent me this wonderful comparison of the comic book and the movie, and so maybe we'll do that along with the show of doing a synastry of Brandon's birth and death chart, and then Bruce Lee and Brandon, and then their death charts together in terms of synastry for both those things, and just look at other things that were happening in the world at that time, just to see if there are some messages from the other realm for us about this, right? That's part of why their lives exist. Like, a lot of times when lives are cut short so quickly and they are artists, their life work becomes a way that we can derive a sort of truth in our own stories, and it's a way of us learning about how to deal with death, because in the end, The Crow's a love story, and an epic love story, because he comes back 1 year later to set things right, and until he does, his work is not done, and he's able to get it all done very quickly. And I think coming into the next few weeks, as we come into the eclipse where the sun and moon are coming very close together, as we approach the anniversary of Brandon Lee's passing, as we have The Crow as a story being risen now in consciousness again, I urge you to look back at the original movie, look back at that story directly, and see how it makes you feel, and what from that story you can find sort of way of finding hope in the darkness, because love connects. And even though bad things happen and there's stories that are such tragedy, through that tragedy there is an alchemy that happens, and it can come with catharsis, and there is sometimes an interesting way of how that all works out that we don't necessarily know until it is the right time. So with that, my Starseed friends, thank you for joining me on this birth and death chart reading of the late, great, wonderful Brandon Lee. I urge you to go watch the original 1994 version that was released on May 13th, 1994. And we will revisit this chart in a few other different ways on the 31st. So not next Sunday, but the following Sunday. So stay tuned for that. And if you found this content useful, entertaining, and informative in any kind of way, I'd appreciate a like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, my friends.